The meeting room felt like a snare the moment I stepped inside, and my boss Greg sat there wearing this crooked little smirk, the kind you recognize when someone is preparing to enjoy your pain. 6 years of grinding myself down, 6 years of proving my worth again and again, and I honestly believed this was finally the day, my promotion to senior director. Natasha, he said, not even bothering to stand, I've got an update about the promotion we discussed. My heart pounded harder. This was supposed to be my victory. We've chosen to move in another direction. Someone more fitting came forward for the role. The words slammed into me like a blow. 6 years of staying after hours, of covering for him whenever he bungled client presentations, of polishing his image in front of upper leadership. 6 years of watching people with half my ability climb higher while I kept hearing to stay patient. Someone more fitting, I managed to repeat. Trevor from the Atlanta office. Fresh perspective, you know. Sometimes you need someone who's not so tied to the old ways, he added. Trevor, the guy who'd been with us for barely 8 months, the same guy I had to correct 3 separate times in our last video call because he didn't grasp our client retention process. But I didn't shout, I didn't tear up, and I didn't even let my expression shift, because in that instant, sitting across from Greg as he basically told me I wasn't worthy, after everything I'd poured into this company, I remembered something crucial. Something he had no clue I knew. Before I go deeper into what unfolded next, can you please take a moment to tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from? I love seeing how far my story reaches, and make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear how this entire situation unravels, because trust me, you will not believe what I did afterward. See, what Greg never realized was that for the past 6 years, I'd been covering the cost of his mother's care at Sunrise Manor, the most luxurious assisted living home in our city, $4,000 every single month, automatically drafted from my own account. How did it begin? Total accident. About 6.5 years ago, I was helping Greg reorganize his office because he'd asked me to handle some personal paperwork while he was traveling. I opened what I assumed was a client invoice, but it turned out to be a letter addressed to him from Sunrise Manor. Final notice. His mother's account was 3 months overdue, totaling $12,000, and they were threatening to remove her if payment didn't arrive within 7 days. I shouldn't have read it, but once I saw the words final notice and discharge, I couldn't look away. The letter explained that Mrs. Patterson would be transferred to a state-funded facility if the family couldn't meet the financial requirements. That night, I did something borderline reckless. I called Sunrise Manor pretending to be from a financial aid program, asking about their anonymous donor options. Turns out they had a whole system designed for people who wanted to quietly support residents' care expenses, mostly guilt-driven charity from wealthy folks. I set up the automatic payment plan that same week. $4,000 every month listed under an anonymous donor. I never intended to tell Greg. I saw it as insurance, something to use only if I ever truly needed leverage. But here's the detail that made everything so perfect. Greg never realized payments had resumed after his account fell behind. He assumed the facility was simply giving him time while he sorted out his finances. When the anonymous contributions started covering every monthly cost, he was told only that a generous benefactor had stepped in, and Greg took every bit of the credit. I watched him for 6 years bragging to anyone who'd listen about how he was sacrificing to support his elderly mother, how he was putting in extra hours to afford her care, how proud he was to be the son who rose to the occasion when family needed him. He even got teary at the company holiday party last year, talking about how his mother always told people what a wonderful provider he was, while his mother, meanwhile, had no idea about the anonymous donor. As far as she knew, Greg was footing every penny of her care costs, and she bragged about him constantly to the other residents, to the staff, to anyone who'd listen. "My Gregory works so hard to keep me here," she'd say. He's such a good boy, making sure his mama is comfortable. The irony was beautiful. Greg was genuinely stressed about money. I could see it eating at him. He'd complain about being stretched thin, about how expensive everything had become, about how he worried nonstop about being able to afford his mother's care long term. He had no clue that the financial pressure he believed he was under had been lifted 6 years earlier by the same employee he kept overlooking for promotions. But that Tuesday morning, sitting in that meeting room listening to him tell me I wasn't suitable for advancement, something inside me shifted. The insurance I'd been carrying all these years suddenly felt like it was time to cash in. I looked at Greg with his smug little expression and said, "I understand completely. Trevor sounds like a great choice." "I'm glad you're taking this so well," he said, actually sounding surprised. "Some people don't handle disappointment with such professionalism." "Oh, I've learned a lot about professionalism working here," I replied, "especially about how important it is to be honest and transparent about your contributions." He nodded like he'd offered me some profound wisdom. "Exactly. That's the kind of mature attitude that'll serve you well in your current role." Current role? Like I should be grateful to keep doing the same job I'd been overqualified for since year 2. I shook his hand, thanked him for his time, and walked back to my desk. Then I opened my e-laptop and navigated to my bank's website. The automatic payment to Sunrise Manor was scheduled to process the next day. $4,000 like clockwork, as it had been for 72 months straight. I stared at that payment screen for about 30 seconds, thinking about Greg's mother telling everyone what a devoted son she had, thinking about Greg accepting praise for sacrifices he'd never made, thinking about someone more suitable getting the job I'd earned. I clicked Cancel Automatic Payment. Then I called Sunrise Manor's billing office. "Hi, this is regarding the anonymous donor account for Mrs. Eleanor Patterson in room 247. I need to terminate the monthly contributions effective immediately." The billing clerk was very understanding. "Anonymous donors change their circumstances all the time," she explained. "They'd send a courtesy notification to the family that the assistance had ended, just so there wouldn't be any surprises when the next bill came due." "When should they expect to receive that notification?" I asked. "We typically send those letters on Fridays so the family has the weekend to process the information before having to make any immediate decisions." Perfect. It was Tuesday. That gave me exactly 3 days. I spent those 3 days working normally, attending meetings, responding to Greg's requests with the same efficiency I'd always shown. He seemed pleased that I wasn't being difficult about the promotion situation. Wednesday, he even complimented my work on a client presentation, saying things like this was exactly why he valued having me in my current position. Thursday, he sent an email to the whole team about how important it was to support Trevor's transition into the senior director role, and how he knew everyone would show the same dedication and teamwork that had made our department so successful. Friday morning, I arrived early and spent some time organizing my desk. I had a feeling things were about to get very interesting. Around 11 Greg's office phone rang, then rang again and again. By noon, he was pacing behind his glass office walls, holding what looked like a very intense conversation. I couldn't hear the words, but his body language got more agitated by the minute. Friday afternoon, he left early without saying goodbye to anyone. Monday morning, Greg looked like he hadn't slept in days. His usually perfect hair was messy, his shirt wrinkled, and he kept checking his phone every few seconds, barely making eye contact during our weekly team meeting. Tuesday, I was at my desk reviewing quarterly reports when Greg appeared beside me. Not at my desk, not in my cubicle space, but literally right beside my chair, close enough to smell his cologne and see that his hands were trembling slightly. "Natasha," he said, and his voice sounded tight and strange. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer." I looked up at him with what I hoped was an expression of polite curiosity. "Of course. What's on your mind?" I said. The anonymous donor who's been helping with my mother's care at Sunrise Manor. The payment stopped last week. And I just... He paused, running a hand through his hair. I need to know if you know anything about who that person might be. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. 6 years of preparation had led to this exact conversation. Anonymous donor? I repeated, tilting my head just a bit. I'm not sure I follow what you're asking. Someone has been paying $4,000 a month for my mother's assisted living for the past 6 years. The facility won't tell me who it is because of privacy rules, but the payment stopped. And my mother is going to be moved to state care by Friday if I can't come up with the funds. The desperation in his voice was flawless, panic not only about the money, but about something much deeper. The slow realization that the identity he'd built for himself was collapsing. That's a tremendous amount of money, I said softly. I had no clue you were receiving help with those expenses. You always made it sound like you were covering everything on your own. His face drained of color. You can't tell anyone about this. Please, if people at work found out that I haven't actually been paying for my mother's care myself. But why would that matter? I asked with innocent confusion. If someone was kind enough to help your family, that's wonderful. There's no shame in accepting support when it's needed. You don't understand, he said, and now his voice carried pure desperation. I've been telling everyone, including my mother, that I've been covering all her bills. If she finds out someone else has been paying this whole time, and that I didn't even know who it was. I watched understanding dawn across his features. Not only was he about to lose his mother's care, but his entire reputation, 6 years of colleagues admiring him for being such a devoted son, 6 years of his mother praising his sacrifice, 6 years of taking credit for generosity that wasn't his, was about to implode. Greg, I said gently, is there something specific you think I might know about this? He stared at me for a long, drawn-out moment. I could practically see his brain spinning, searching for any explanation that didn't involve me. But the timing was too perfect. The anonymous donor stops helping the exact week he denies me a promotion. Natasha, he said slowly, please tell me you didn't. I rose from my desk and met his eyes directly. I thought, I said, keeping my voice steady and perfectly professional, that someone more suitable would handle the situation. Every last bit of color vanished from his face. You've been paying for my mother's care for 6 years. Anonymous donor, I corrected. I'd never want recognition for something like that, just like I'd never want to take credit for work I didn't do, or achievements that weren't mine. He grabbed the edge of my desk like he needed something to hold him upright. Why? He whispered. Why did you help my mother? Or why did you stop? Both. Either. I don't understand. I sat back down and resumed reviewing my quarterly reports, not even looking at him as I answered. I helped because I found that final notice letter 6 years ago when you asked me to organize your office files. Your mother was about to be moved to state care, and I had the ability to prevent it. I stopped because I realized someone more suitable should probably be taking care of family financial responsibilities. Silence expanded between us. I could hear him breathing shallow and uneven. How much? He finally asked. $4,000 a month for 72 months. You can do the math. $288,000. Plus interest on the credit cards I had to use that first year before I got my finances organized enough to pull directly from savings. Jesus Christ, he breathed. Your mother will be transferred Friday unless payment arrangements are made, I said, still focused on my computer screen. The facility director suggested you visit some state care options this week to prepare her for the transition. State care, he repeated, like the words were in another language. I'm sure she'll understand once you explain that the anonymous donor situation changed. Though it might confuse her, considering she's been telling everyone how proud she is that her son can afford such a nice facility. Greg made a strangled, broken sound. The staff mentioned she talks about you nonstop. I went on. How hard you work to keep her comfortable. How she brags to the other residents about having such a successful son who takes care of his family. I'm sure that won't change even after she learns the truth about the finances. You don't understand, he said, and now there were unmistakable tears buried in his voice. She'll never forgive me. Not for lying to her for 6 years, but for not being the son she thought I was. And that's when I finally looked up at him. Greg, I said, I've spent 6 years watching you take credit for my work, my ideas, my contributions to this company. I've watched you accept praise for sacrifices you never made and achievements you never earned. I've watched you build a reputation on foundations that weren't yours. His legs seemed to give out, and he sank into the chair beside my desk. But I never knew, he said weakly. I never knew you were paying for her care. That's what made it so perfect. I told him, you built your entire identity as the devoted son on something you had no control over, just like you've built your management reputation on work you didn't actually do. The realization was settling over him now. The full scope of what was happening. Not just the immediate crisis with his mother's care, but the complete collapse of everything he'd used to define himself. What do you want? He asked finally. I don't want anything, Greg. I wanted that promotion, but you made it very clear that someone more suitable was available. The promotion, he said, understanding dawning, finally clicking. You could have told me any time in the past 6 years. You could have told me what you were doing. And what would you have done? Given me a raise? Promoted me? Or would you have found a way to make it about how generous and forward-thinking you were as a manager, having an employee who cared so much about company family values? He couldn't answer because we both knew the truth. Your mother has 4 days, I said, turning back to my computer. I'm sure someone suitable will figure out a solution. Greg sat there for another minute, staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Then he stood up slowly and walked back to his office. I watched him through the glass walls as he sat at his desk with his head in his hands. But this was just the beginning, because what Greg didn't realize yet was that his problems were about to get much, much worse. That afternoon, I heard Greg on the phone with multiple people. First, what sounded like his bank asking about emergency loan options. Then someone who was probably his mother, his voice getting higher and more strained as the conversation went on. By 4 hours, he was calling assisted living facilities, asking about payment plans and financial assistance programs. Wednesday morning, Greg looked worse. His usual confidence was completely gone, replaced by this frantic energy that everyone in the office was starting to notice. During our team meeting, he kept losing his train of thought mid-sentence and checking his phone under the table. Everything okay, Greg? Asked Miranda from accounting. Fine, he said quickly. Just some family logistics to sort out. But it wasn't fine, and it was about to get so much worse. Thursday around lunchtime, I got a call at my direct line from someone I wasn't expecting. Is this Natasha Chen? This is Patricia Williams from Sunrise Manor's administrative office. My heart started beating faster. Yes, this is Natasha. I'm calling because we have a rather unusual situation with the Patterson account, and your name came up in our records as an emergency contact. Emergency contact? I'd forgotten about that detail from 6 years ago when I'd set up the payment system. They'd asked for someone to contact if there were ever issues with the anonymous donor account, and I'd given them my information. What kind of situation? I asked. Well, Mr. Patterson came in yesterday, quite upset about the anonymous donor payments ending. He was asking a lot of questions about who had been making the contributions, and he seemed to think it might be someone he worked with. This was interesting. I see. The thing is, he's been telling his mother and our staff for years that he was personally covering all her care costs. But when we pulled the account history to help him understand the payment situation, it became clear that he hasn't made a single payment toward her care since 2019. 2019. the year I'd started the anonymous donations. That must be confusing, I said carefully. Miss Chen, I need to ask you directly. Are you the anonymous donor who's been covering Mrs. Patterson's expenses? I took a deep breath. Yes. Can I ask why you stopped the payments? This was the moment I'd been preparing for, though I hadn't expected it to come from the facility directly. My circumstances changed, I said. I'm no longer in a position to continue that level of financial assistance. I understand completely, Patricia said. These arrangements change all the time, but I'm calling because Mr. Patterson is making some rather serious accusations about the timing of your decision. And frankly, we're concerned about the family dynamics here. What kind of accusations? I asked. He's suggesting that you deliberately timed the payment cancellation to coincide with some workplace conflict. He's quite agitated and has been making phone calls from his mother's room, disturbing other residents. He's also upsetting our billing staff by demanding information we legally cannot share regarding donor confidentiality. Greg was unraveling, and he was doing it in full view of everyone. Patricia, I said, I made those payments for 6 years because I chose to. I stopped them for personal reasons. Mr. Patterson's workplace issues have nothing to do with his mother's care, and I'm sorry he's suggesting otherwise. Of course, she replied. I just wanted to reach out to you directly because Mrs. Patterson is asking many questions about why her son seems so distressed, and we want to make sure we're handling the situation correctly. After I hung up, I realized Greg's problems were expanding in ways he probably never imagined. Not only was he facing financial disaster and family humiliation, but he was leaving behind a trail of erratic behavior that could haunt him professionally. Friday morning, the day his mother was scheduled to be transferred, Greg didn't come to work. But Trevor did. Trevor, the golden boy from Atlanta who'd taken the promotion meant for me, walked into our morning meeting looking confused and uneasy. Has anyone heard from Greg? He asked. We were supposed to review the transition timeline today, but he's not answering calls or emails. Miranda checked her calendar. He didn't mark anything about being out on the shared schedule. This is strange, said Kyle from development. Greg never skips meetings without notice. I stayed silent, but I was wondering what was happening at Sunrise Manor. Had Greg managed to gather the money? Had his mother been transferred? Was he dealing with the fallout of 6 years of deception finally hitting him? My question was answered around noon when my desk phone rang again. Natasha, this is Patricia from Sunrise Manor once more. I'm sorry to trouble you, but we have a situation that needs clarification. What's going on? I asked. Mrs. Patterson's transfer was supposed to happen this morning, but Mr. Patterson arrived with a cashier's check for $12,000, enough to cover the immediate debt and buy some time. However, there's been an incident. What kind of incident? I asked. Mrs. Patterson apparently overheard her son arguing with our billing director about payment histories and anonymous donors. She became extremely upset and demanded to know what was going on. When Mr. Patterson tried to explain the situation to her, Patricia paused, and I could hear muffled voices behind her. Let's just say Mrs. Patterson is not pleased to discover that someone else has been covering her care, while she has spent years boasting about her son's financial support. Oh no, this was spiraling even further than I expected. She's currently refusing to speak to her son and has asked that he not be allowed into her room until she decides whether she can forgive him for making her look foolish in front of everyone here. The devastation was total. Not only had Greg's financial image collapsed, but his relationship with his mother might be permanently damaged. Patricia, I never intended for Mrs. Patterson to be hurt by any of this, I said, and I meant it. I genuinely only wanted to help when I began making those payments. I understand, she said, and please don't feel responsible for their family dynamics. But there's one more thing I need to mention. Mr. Patterson has been pressing our staff for your personal contact information. We haven't provided it, of course, but he seems very determined to speak with you directly. That afternoon, Greg finally showed up at work. He looked like he'd been through a storm. His shirt was rumpled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes were red, like he'd been crying or hadn't slept in days. He walked straight to my desk without even passing his office. "We need to talk," he said, his voice barely steady. "I'm working," I replied without looking up from my screen. "My mother won't talk to me. She thinks I'm a liar and a fraud. The entire facility staff knows I haven't been paying her bills. I had to borrow against my house just to stop her transfer, and she still may never forgive me." I finally looked at him. "I'm sorry your mother is upset." "Sorry?" His voice rose and people began glancing over. "You destroyed my family and you're sorry?" "Greg," I said calmly, "I supported your family for 6 years. You ruined your own reputation by taking credit for something you didn't do. You could have told me. You could have said something. And then what? You would have felt obligated to repay me. You would have given me that promotion out of guilt. You would have treated me differently because you owed me money." He stared at me, and I could see him realizing I was right. If he'd known about the payments, it would have changed everything between us, but not necessarily in ways that would have helped my career. "Besides," I continued, "I thought someone more suitable would handle the situation." "Stop saying that," he snapped. "Why? It's what you told me about my promotion. Someone more suitable emerged. Trevor was the better option. I was too rooted in the old ways of doing things, remember?" That's when Trevor himself appeared beside us, looking painfully uneasy. "Hey, Greg, I've been trying to reach you all morning. We really need to go over these client files before my presentation on Monday." Greg turned to Trevor, and I watched something shift behind his expression. Not anger exactly, but a kind of frantic calculation. "Actually, Trevor," Greg said, "I think we need to talk about something regarding your promotion." Trevor blinked, confused. "What about it?" "Well," Greg said slowly, "it's been brought to my attention that there may have been some oversights in the selection process, certain qualifications that weren't fully reviewed." My stomach dropped. Greg was about to attempt fixing everything by giving me the promotion now, thinking it would somehow undo the wreckage, but it was far too late for that. And honestly, I didn't want the position anymore. Not like this. "Greg," I said quietly, "don't." "Don't what?" he demanded. "Don't try to fix this now. Don't acknowledge that I've been the backbone of this team for 6 years, while you took credit for everything." Trevor was looking between us like he'd stumbled into the middle of a movie with no context. "What is going on?" he asked. "What's going on?" Greg repeated, bitterness creeping into his voice. "Is that I've been a complete fraud, and the person who should have gotten your job has been carrying my entire life for 6 years." "Greg, stop," I said, rising to my feet. People were openly staring now, and this was spiraling out of control. "No, I won't stop," he said, turning to address the whole office. "Everyone should know the kind of manager I've been. Everyone should know that Natasha has been doing half my work while I took the praise, and that she paid for my mother's medical care while I let everyone think I was some devoted son." The office fell dead silent. She spent nearly $300,000 of her own money keeping my mother in assisted living, and when I denied her a promotion last week, she cut off the payments. And honestly, she was absolutely justified. I wanted to vanish. This was never how I intended any of this to unfold. My revenge was supposed to be quiet, personal, a reminder to Greg about consequences. I never wanted to be the office hero or the centerpiece of gossip. "Greg," I said firmly, "you need to go home." "I can't go home," he said, voice breaking. "My mother won't speak to me. My wife is furious about the loan I took out on the house. I've spent 6 years lying to everyone about who I am, and now they all know." Trevor cleared his throat awkwardly. "Maybe we should reschedule our meeting." "There is no meeting," Greg said. There is no promotion. Natasha should have been senior director years ago, and the only reason she wasn't is because I was too insecure and too much of a coward to admit she was better at this job than I'll ever be. That was when our department head, Lisa, appeared at the edge of the workspace. "Greg, I need to see you in my office." "Now," she said, her voice tight with the kind of tension that meant real trouble. "Lisa," Greg said, wiping his eyes, "before you say anything, you should know I've been fundamentally dishonest about my abilities and contributions to this department. Greg, my office, now." As they walked away, I realized that my once private revenge had just erupted into a full-scale workplace crisis. Trevor still stood there, looking rattled, and everyone else in the office was pretending to work, while obviously hanging on to every word. "Natasha," Trevor said softly, "is what he said true? About the promotion and the money and all of it?" I sat back at my desk and opened my laptop. "Trevor," I said, "you earned the position. Management made their choice based on what they believed was best for the company. But if you were more qualified..." "Qualifications don't always decide things," I said. "Sometimes other factors get involved." He lingered a moment longer, clearly wanting to ask more, but I focused on my screen until he finally walked away. 20 minutes later, Lisa returned, without Greg. "Natasha, can I speak with you privately?" We stepped into the small conference room and she shut the door. "I need you to explain what really happened here," she said. So I did. I told her about finding the letter, about the anonymous payments, about Greg taking credit for his mother's care while believing he was financially drowning. I told her about the promotion decision and why I finally stopped the payments. "You paid nearly $300,000 for your boss's mother's medical care," Lisa repeated slowly. "I did. For 6 years. Yes." And he had no idea. Not until this week. Lisa leaned back in her chair. "Natasha, this is the most tangled workplace situation I've ever run into." "I understand if there need to be consequences," I said. "I know my choices created a conflict of interest, even if Greg had no idea about it." "Consequences?" Lisa stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "Natasha, you essentially covered an employee's family responsibilities out of your own wallet for 6 years. That isn't a conflict of interest. I don't even know what that is." "It only became a conflict when I used it as leverage," I admitted. "Did you, though? Or did you simply stop doing something incredibly generous when you realized that generosity wasn't being valued?" I didn't answer that. "Greg has been placed on administrative leave while they review his management conduct," Lisa added. "Apparently, this situation has encouraged other team members to speak up about him taking credit for their efforts and contributions." That caught me off guard. I hadn't realized others had witnessed anything. "We're going to need to reorganize this department," Lisa continued. "And honestly, we're going to need someone to guide that restructuring. Someone who understands the team dynamics and has the trust of the employees." I watched her closely. "What are you asking me?" "I'm asking if you'd consider Greg's role, not the senior director job Trevor got, but the department head position, Greg's actual job." I sat there for a moment, absorbing her words. 6 months ago, I would have leapt at the chance. But now, after everything that had unfolded, I wasn't sure I even wanted to remain with this company. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Of course, take the weekend. But Natasha, I want you to know that what you did for Greg's family, no matter how it ended, shows a level of integrity that's rare in the corporate world. We'd be fortunate to have you in leadership." That evening, I drove to Sunrise Manor. I'd been thinking about Mrs. Patterson all day, worried about how she was coping with everything. At the front desk, I asked if I could visit her briefly. "Are you family?" the receptionist asked. "No, but I'm the one who handled her financial arrangements. I just wanted to confirm she was all right." The receptionist made a quick call, then nodded. "Room 247, but please keep it short." She's had a rough day. I tapped gently on Mrs. Patterson's door and heard a faint, "Come in." She sat in her chair beside the window, looking smaller and older than I expected. When she saw me, her eyes widened slightly. "Are you the girl paying for my care?" "Yes, ma'am, I'm Natasha." "Sit down, dear," she said, motioning to the chair across from her. "I need to understand something." I waited. "Why?" she asked plainly. "I found a letter saying you were going to be moved to a less comfortable facility," I told her. "I had the means to stop that, so I did." "For 6 years?" "Yes, ma'am. And my son never knew." "No, ma'am." She stayed quiet for a long time, staring out the window. "He's a good boy," she said at last. "Not perfect, but good. He just wanted everyone to believe he was more capable than he truly was." "I know," I said. "Are you angry with him?" I thought carefully. I was, but mostly I'm just disappointed. "He made you feel small," she said, not questioning. "Yes. I'm sorry about that, dear. And I'm sorry he claimed credit for your kindness. That wasn't right. Mrs. Patterson, I hope someday you can forgive him. I believe he really does love you. He just got tangled up in trying to be someone he wasn't." She reached forward and gently patted my hand. "You're a good girl, Natasha. Too good for the mess that came with this situation." When I left Sunrise Manor that night, I felt lighter somehow. Not because everything was fixed, but because I remembered why I had helped in the first place. Not as leverage or insurance, but because someone needed support, and I could give it. Monday morning, I walked into Lisa's office and accepted the department head position. Trevor kept the senior director role, and honestly, he's turned out to be quite good at it. Being dropped into a chaotic mess forced him to mature quickly, and he's been nothing but respectful and cooperative since everything unfolded. Greg never returned to work. Office gossip said he accepted a job with a smaller company in another city, and that he and his mother eventually reconciled. I hope that's true. As for me, I learned something vital about revenge. The strongest kind isn't about tearing someone else down. It's about refusing to keep participating in something that diminishes you. For 6 years, I upheld Greg's false version of himself while shrinking my own worth. When I stopped doing that, the natural consequences handled everything else. Sometimes the best revenge is simply stepping back and letting people deal with the reality they created for themselves. If this story struck a chord with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt undervalued despite everything you gave? How did you respond? And please hit that like button and subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Sometimes the most astonishing things that happen to us are the ones that are completely true.